She was ridiculed at a jiu-jitsu class, called too weak by the arrogant instructor. The black belt smirked as he challenged her to spar. Nobody expected what happened next. She submitted him in just 15 seconds. But this simple woman had a secret that was about to change everything. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated based on appearance alone? If this story resonates with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Genie Soul Stories for more powerful tales of courage and redemption. Tammy Smith adjusted her brown belt in the parking lot, taking a deep breath as she eyed the gleaming glass facade of Supreme Combat Academy. The autumn sun reflected off the building's windows, momentarily blinding her. At 38, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she looked nothing like what people expected a martial artist to be. "This one's for you, Grandpa," she whispered, touching the worn fabric of her belt, the brown belt she'd chosen specifically for today, leaving her black belt safely tucked away at home. 3 months ago, Tammy had promised her dying grandfather, the man who had taught her jiu-jitsu from the age of 6, that she would help change the toxic culture infiltrating the sport they both loved. For 30 years, Master Lawrence A. Hubbard had trained her in their family dojo, away from the competitive circuit, eventually awarding her a black belt that few knew about. "The true spirit of jiu-jitsu is being lost," Lawrence told her, his weathered hand gripping hers with surprising strength. "It's becoming about ego, not growth. Promise me you'll help bring it back to what it should be." Today was the first step in fulfilling that promise. After hearing countless stories about Supreme Combat Academy's discriminatory atmosphere, especially toward women, Tammy had devised a simple test. She would enter as a newcomer to the area, claiming to be a brown belt, and document how she was treated. She'd done her research. The head instructor, Richard Hartley, had a reputation for building champions through what he called aggressive weeding out. His social media was filled with videos of intense sparring sessions that often crossed the line into bullying. As she gathered her gym bag from the passenger seat, Tammy's phone buzzed. It was a text from her best friend, Amy Campbell. "Camera ready in the locker room. Good luck." Amy, already inside posing as a regular member, would capture video evidence of whatever transpired. They weren't looking to shame anyone publicly. The footage was for a presentation Tammy was preparing on inclusivity in combat sports. With one final glance at the photo of her grandfather tucked into her wallet, Tammy squared her shoulders and walked toward the entrance. Her heart rate remained steady. A lifetime of training had taught her to control her nerves. "Remember," she told herself, "this isn't about winning or proving anything. It's about exposing the truth." As she pulled open the heavy glass door, the sounds of bodies hitting mats and the distinctive smell of athletic tape and sweat washed over her. She approached the front desk where a muscular young man barely glanced up from his phone. "I'm here for the advanced class," Tammy said, her voice confident but unassuming. "I just moved to the area." The test had begun. The receptionist gave Tammy a once-over, his skepticism barely concealed. "Advanced class is for brown and black belts only," he said, eyeing her worn gig and humble demeanor. "I'm a brown belt," Tammy replied evenly, gesturing to her belt. "Trained for about 15 years. He raised an eyebrow but nodded toward a clipboard. "Sign the waiver. Locker rooms are through there. Class starts in 10. Tammy signed using her mother's maiden name, maintaining her anonymous status. As she made her way to the women's locker room, she noticed how the facility was impeccably equipped. Competition-grade mats, strength training equipment, and walls adorned with medals and photos of champions. Inside the locker room, Amy pretended not to know her, focusing on tying back her blonde hair while speaking in hushed tones. "Hartley just arrived. He's in rare form today. Already made 2 guys sit out for insufficient intensity during the intermediate class." Tammy changed quickly, securing her brown belt and removing all jewelry except for a simple wooden bracelet, her grandfather's gift when she earned her black belt. She noticed a few other women preparing for class, all noticeably muscular and wearing expressions that suggested they had something to prove. New face. A tall woman with a purple belt approached. "I'm Marie Stowe." "I'm Tammy." I just moved here. Thought I'd check out the local scene. Marie's smile didn't reach her eyes. Word of advice. Hartley doesn't think much of female practitioners above blue belt unless you've medaled nationally. Claims we lack natural aggression, so be prepared. Thanks for the heads up, Tammy replied, carefully keeping her expression neutral despite the inner spark of anger. When Tammy stepped onto the mats, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. The dozen or so advanced students, predominantly men, eyed her with expressions ranging from curiosity to dismissal. A tall, powerfully built man with a facial scar stood at the center of the mat. His black belt wrapped precisely around his waist. Richard Hartley, in his early 40s, had the confident posture of someone accustomed to dominance. He stopped mid-sentence as Tammy bowed before stepping onto the mat, a traditional sign of respect many of his students had already abandoned. "Well, what do we have here?" Richard said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies' self-defense class is on Thursday, sweetheart." Several students chuckled. Tammy maintained her composure, bowing formally. "I'm here for the advanced class. Brown belt, 15 years of training." Richard's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth that contrasted with his calculating eyes. "Is that so? Well then, let's see what you've got." "Line up by rank," Richard barked, and the students scrambled into position. Tammy took her place among the other brown belts. All men, all at least 30 pounds heavier than her. Amy, stationed in the corner with her phone inconspicuously angled toward the class, caught Tammy's eye briefly. The camera was rolling. "Today we're working triangle escapes," Richard announced, scanning the line. "I need someone to demonstrate with." His eyes landed on Tammy with deliberate slowness. "Our new friend can help me." Tammy stepped forward, maintaining a neutral expression. This was standard procedure, using newcomers as demonstration partners. But the glint in Richard's eyes suggested he had more in mind than just demonstration. "So, you claim 15 years of experience," Richard said as they faced each other in the center of the mat. "Where did you train?" "Hubbard Jiu-Jitsu Academy," she replied honestly. "Her grandfather's home dojo." Richard frowned. "Never heard of it." "Competition record?" "None," Tammy admitted. "My teacher believed in jiu-jitsu as self-improvement, not sport." A few snickers rippled through the class. Richard didn't bother hiding his contempt. "Ah, one of those spiritual journey types. Well, this is an academy that produces champions, not philosophers." Without warning, Richard shot in for a takedown. Though she could have easily countered it, Tammy allowed herself to be taken down, maintaining her cover while still displaying competent defense. "See that, everyone." Richard addressed the class while establishing side control. A real brown belt would have sprawled properly. "This is what happens when you train at strip mall dojos." The insult to her grandfather's teaching stung, but Tammy reminded herself of the purpose of this test. She made a technical escape, not too flashy, but solid enough to earn respect from a fair instructor. Richard, however, wasn't impressed. "Lucky move," he muttered, then louder. "Let's try something else." For the next 10 minutes, Richard continued the demonstration, gradually increasing the intensity and technical difficulty. Tammy carefully measured her responses, showing enough skill to justify her brown belt, but holding back her true capabilities. "Honestly," Richard finally said, standing up and addressing the class while Tammy was still on the ground, "this is what's wrong with jiu-jitsu today. People walking around with belts they haven't earned." He turned to Tammy, extending a hand to help her up. When she took it, he yanked harder than necessary, causing her to stumble slightly. "Too weak," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Women like you should stick to yoga." Tammy's eyes flashed momentarily before she regained her composed expression. The test was yielding exactly the evidence she'd expected, and her grandfather's concerns were being validated with every passing minute. After the demonstration, Richard paired everyone up for drilling. Unsurprisingly, Tammy found herself matched with Ronald Kemp, a muscular brown belt who outweighed her by at least 70 pounds. "Don't worry," Ronald said with a smirk. "I'll go easy on you." As they practiced the designated technique, a triangle escape, Tammy noticed Richard hovering nearby, watching her with critical eyes. "More pressure, Ronald," Richard instructed. "She needs to feel what a real triangle is like." Ronald increased the pressure to uncomfortable levels beyond what was necessary for drilling. Tammy adapted smoothly, using proper technique to relieve the worst of it while appearing to struggle appropriately. "Your defense is all wrong," Richard interjected, kneeling beside them. "Here, let me show you." He repositioned her arms in a way that actually made the technique less effective, a test Tammy recognized immediately. Either he was deliberately sabotaging her, or he didn't know the technique as well as he claimed. "Thank you, sir," she said, hiding her knowledge behind a mask of gratitude. She caught Amy's eye across the room, knowing this interaction was being captured. Halfway through the class, Richard clapped his hands for attention. "Let's make this interesting. Round-robin sparring, 30-second rounds, winner stays on." This was unusual for a technique class, but the students seemed accustomed to Richard's unpredictable teaching style. They formed a circle around the mat, excitement building. "Smith," Richard pointed at Tammy. "You're up first against." He scanned the room and smiled coldly. "Me." The room fell silent. It was uncommon for an instructor to spar with a new student during their first class, especially in such a public, pressure-filled format. "Unless you're not up for it," Richard added, challenge dripping from every word. Tammy stepped onto the mat, bowing respectfully despite the openly unfair challenge. "I'm happy to train, sir." Richard didn't bother bowing back. "Start standing. Let's see what you've got." They circled each other, Richard moving with the confidence of someone who expected an easy victory. Tammy maintained proper form, watching his movements carefully. "Attack me," Richard goaded. "Come on, brown belt, show us what you've learned in 15 years. When Tammy executed a textbook single-leg takedown attempt, Richard countered with unnecessary force, slamming her to the mat harder than was appropriate for training. "Too weak," he announced to the class, now controlling her from top position. "This is why women shouldn't be given upper belts. They simply lack the physical attributes for effective jiu-jitsu." As he transitioned to a kimura grip, applying pressure to Tammy's shoulder, a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. He was going too far too fast, with someone he believed couldn't defend properly. Tammy knew she had a decision to make. Tammy could feel Richard applying the kimura with excessive torque, the kind that tears rotator cuffs and ends training careers. A flash of memory hit her. Her grandfather teaching her this very submission when she was 12, emphasizing control and respect for one's training partner. "Jiu-Jitsu is about using leverage to overcome strength," Master Lawrence would say. "But with that power comes responsibility. Never use it to hurt or humiliate." Richard was doing precisely what her grandfather had warned against, using technique as a weapon for ego rather than as a tool for growth. She could feel the students watching intently, some uncomfortable with their instructor's obvious intent to hurt, others seemingly enjoying the spectacle. Through the corner of her eye, Tammy saw Amy shift position, ensuring she had a clear view of what was unfolding. The evidence was being recorded, but at what cost? If Tammy continued her charade, she risked actual injury. "Tap," Richard growled, cranking the submission harder. "Unless you're too proud." Tammy made her decision in that split second. This had gone far enough. While maintaining her cover was important, protecting herself, and sending a message about what jiu-jitsu should truly represent, mattered more. With a subtle shift of her hips, Tammy created just enough space to relieve the pressure on her shoulder. Richard, feeling her movement, responded by committing more weight forward, exactly as she anticipated. "You're only making it worse for yourself," he grunted. Tammy closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," she thought. "I know this wasn't the plan, but sometimes a lesson needs to be taught." In one fluid motion, she executed a perfect technical escape that her grandfather had invented, a move known only to those he had personally taught. Richard, caught by surprise at the sudden reversal, found himself momentarily off balance. That moment was all Tammy needed. She transitioned smoothly from defense to offense, capturing Richard's arm in a textbook armbar. Before he could react, she had established perfect position. Her legs locked across his chest, his arm extended between her thighs, her hips raised to create the leverage that made jiu-jitsu so effective. Richard's eyes widened in shock, his confidence replaced by confusion and the first flickers of fear. He hadn't expected this, not from someone he had dismissed so thoroughly. "What the?" he started to say, but Tammy had already made her adjustment, applying just enough pressure to make her point without causing injury. The entire class fell silent, watching in disbelief as their seemingly invincible instructor found himself caught in a perfect submission by the woman he had just been ridiculing. The moment of truth had arrived. Time seemed to slow down as Tammy maintained the armbar position. The gym had fallen completely silent. The only sounds were Richard's increasingly rapid breathing and the faint electronic sound of the air conditioning. 1 second. Richard's initial shock gave way to desperate resistance. He attempted to muscle out of the submission, using his considerable strength to try and pull his arm free. 2 seconds. 3. 4. Tammy adjusted minutely, maintaining perfect technique against his raw power. This was the fundamental principle of jiu-jitsu: leverage and technique overcoming brute force. 5 seconds. "Let go," Richard growled, too quietly for most of the class to hear. But Tammy caught the panic edging into his voice. 7. She could have applied more pressure, could have forced an immediate submission, but that wasn't her grandfather's way. Master Lawrence had always emphasized giving opponents a chance to acknowledge defeat with dignity. Seconds. Richard's attempts to escape grew more frantic, less technical. He twisted his body, trying to roll away from the pressure, but Tammy adjusted flawlessly, maintaining the submission while transitioning with him. In. The students watching had begun to murmur, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and newfound respect. Marie, the woman from the locker room, had a small smile forming at the corners of her mouth. 11 seconds. "Tap," Tammy said calmly, applying a fraction more pressure, enough to send a clear message without causing injury. "It's okay to tap." 12. Richard's face had turned crimson, partly from physical exertion, partly from wounded pride. His eyes darted around the room, seeing his students witnessing his defeat. 15. With one final futile attempt to muscle out, Richard exhaled sharply as he realized he was truly caught. The fight drained from him visibly, his body going slack with acceptance. 14. The sound of his palms slapping the mat echoed through the silent gym, the universal signal of submission in jiu-jitsu. Tammy immediately released the hold, rolling away and returning to a kneeling position, bowing respectfully as she had been taught. "Thank you for the training opportunity," she said formally, extending a hand to help Richard up, the traditional gesture of reconciliation after a submission. Richard ignored her hand, pushing himself up and adjusting his now disheveled gig. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions: humiliation, anger, confusion, and beneath it all, a reluctant glimmer of respect. "Lucky move," he muttered, though no one in the room believed it. Tammy remained kneeling, maintaining perfect etiquette despite Richard's breach of protocol. The rest of the class stood frozen, unsure how to react to seeing their seemingly invincible instructor defeated so efficiently. 14 seconds. That's all it had taken to shake the foundations of Richard's carefully constructed kingdom. The gym remained in stunned silence for several heartbeats before erupting into hushed conversations. Tammy rose to her feet, maintaining her composure while Richard stalked to the edge of the mat, adjusting his belt with sharp, angry movements. "That was incredible," Ronald said, his earlier condescension replaced with genuine admiration. "Where did you learn that transition?" Before Tammy could answer, Richard interjected, his pride wounded but his instructor's authority reasserting itself. "It was a fluke. Back to drilling, everyone. Smith, take a break. You look tired." The dismissal was transparent, an attempt to minimize what had just happened. But Tammy simply bowed and stepped off the mat. As she walked toward her water bottle, she noticed several students watching her with newfound interest. Amy approached, phone now tucked away, playing her part as a curious classmate. That was amazing. I've never seen anyone submit him. He underestimated me, Tammy replied simply. It happens sometimes. That wasn't just a brown belt move, came a new voice. Tammy turned to see Marie standing beside her, eyes narrowed with suspicion and admiration. That was high-level stuff, competition level. Tammy took a careful sip of water. My grandfather had some unique approaches to traditional techniques. From across the room, Richard called the class back to order, his voice noticeably tighter than before. Partner up for situational sparring. Smith, since you're so confident today, you can work with Anthony. He gestured toward a young man with a black belt, clearly one of his favorite students based on the numerous competition photos featuring him on the wall. He's setting you up, Marie whispered. Anthony Elliott was a national champion last year. Tammy nodded. It's okay. As she approached Anthony, she could see uncertainty in his eyes. He had witnessed her submission of Richard and was recalibrating his expectations accordingly. Start from closed guard, Richard instructed. Anthony on top. Go. What followed was a technical display that left no doubt about Tammy's skill level. Rather than dominating with submissions, she demonstrated perfect defensive techniques, countering each of Anthony's attacks with precise, efficient movements that spoke of decades of training. After 5 minutes, Richard clapped his hands sharply. Enough, everyone. Water break. He approached Tammy with narrowed eyes. Who are you really? He demanded, voice low enough that only those nearby could hear. No brown belt moves like that. What's your game here? Tammy met his gaze calmly. I told you I trained with Master Lawrence Hubbard. Richard's eyes widened with sudden recognition. Hubbard. The Lawrence Hubbard. She nodded once, watching comprehension dawn on Richard's face. You're his granddaughter. Tammy Smith. Yes, she admitted. I am. The revelation of Tammy's identity changed the atmosphere in the gym instantly. Though not widely known in commercial jiu-jitsu circles, Lawrence Hubbard was a legend among serious practitioners. One of the first Americans to receive a black belt in Brazil during the 1960s, renowned for his technical innovations and philosophical approach to the art. Lawrence Hubbard refused to commercialize his knowledge, Richard said, his tone now carrying reluctant respect. He turned down millions to keep his teachings private. He believed jiu-jitsu was about personal growth, not profit, Tammy replied evenly. Richard studied her with new eyes. So, the brown belt was my choice today. I earned my black belt 15 years ago. A ripple of whispers spread through the students gathered nearby. Amy, still recording discreetly, captured it all. But why come here like this? Richard asked, genuine confusion replacing his earlier hostility. Tammy took a deep breath. This was the moment her grandfather had prepared her for, the opportunity to speak truth to the very attitudes threatening the art they loved. My grandfather died 3 months ago, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. His last wish was for me to help preserve what jiu-jitsu truly stands for: respect, technical excellence, and using strength to protect, not dominate. She gestured around the gym. He heard about academies like this one, where new students are hazed rather than welcomed, where women are automatically considered less capable, where the focus is on breaking people down instead of building them up. Richard's jaw tightened defensively. We produce champions here. At what cost? Tammy countered. How many potential black belts have you driven away? How many women have you discouraged? How many people who could have found healing through jiu-jitsu instead found only more trauma? The questions hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. Several students nodded slightly, their own experiences silently validating her words. I came here to document the problem, Tammy continued, not to embarrass anyone. This test, coming in as a brown belt, was to experience firsthand how newcomers are treated. She turned to address the entire class. Jiu-Jitsu saved my life after a difficult childhood. It taught me confidence when I had none, showed me strength I didn't know I possessed. Everyone deserves that opportunity, not just those who already fit a certain mold. Richard stood silent, clearly processing her words. His expression had softened slightly, pride giving way to reflection. "Your grandfather," he finally said, "was the reason I started jiu-jitsu. I saw a video of him when I was a teenager. The way he moved, so efficient, so calm under pressure." Tammy saw something unexpected then. Vulnerability beneath Richard's carefully constructed armor. "I think," he said quietly, "we have a lot to talk about." 6 months later, Tammy pushed open the glass doors of Supreme Combat Academy, now renamed Hubbard Supreme Jiu-Jitsu, and smiled at the transformation before her. The walls, once covered exclusively with competition medals, now also displayed the principles of jiu-jitsu penned by her grandfather: respect, humility, technical excellence, community. Richard, who had spent a week training with Tammy after their initial encounter, had embraced the opportunity to return to the roots of the art he loved. His technical skill had never been in question, only his teaching approach needed refinement. "Good morning, Professor Smith," called a teenage girl practicing drills in the corner, one of many female students who had joined since the academy's culture shift. Tammy waved, setting down her bag and greeting Amy, now a full-time staff member documenting the academy's journey for a series on positive martial arts communities. Richard emerged from his office. His demeanor noticeably changed from their first meeting. The aggressive edge had been replaced by confident calm. "Ready for the seminar?" he asked, gesturing to the group of instructors from other academies gathering for Tammy's workshop on inclusive teaching methods. "Always," she replied, adjusting her black belt, the one she now wore proudly with her grandfather's name embroidered alongside her own. As the visitors settled on the mat, Tammy caught sight of her grandfather's photo now hanging prominently by the entrance. She could almost hear his gentle voice. "The true victory in jiu-jitsu is not when you defeat others, but when you help them rise." She took her place at the front of the class and bowed deeply. The real work was just beginning. If this story touched your heart, remember that true strength isn't about dominating others, it's about lifting them up. Every day we have opportunities to challenge discrimination and create more inclusive communities. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated based on their appearance? Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Genie Soul Stories for more powerful tales that remind us to look beyond appearances and treat everyone with respect. From where are you watching today? Remember, like Tammy discovered, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stay true to our values, even when others don't immediately understand them.